And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside once again by Andrew Johnson. And oh man, Andrew, did we have a very wild week number 2 in the National Football League. A lot of stunning upsets. Unfortunately, a lot of big-time injuries happened as well, which we'll break down a little bit later on in the show. We even had a quarterback change happen after week 2 went down. So there's a lot to talk about this week. And as I keep mentioning, it's only week 2. We have a long season still ahead of us as we head into week number 3 of this NFL season. But Johnson, I don't know what to say. It's just been a very weird start to what is surely has been going to be I should say so far is and will be a very interesting season this year in the NFL.
Interesting is putting it lightly. We
Yeah.
have a lot of teams that we thought were going to be good, 0-2, and a lot of teams that we thought were going to be bad or mediocre, 2-0.
2-0,
So
yeah.
it has definitely been something so far. I can't remember the last time we've had such a lack of really good quarterback play in the NFL. It's been 20 years since we've really had a situation like this where I think for the first time ever, the NFL, despite all their rules and their regulations and the changes they made to protect the quarterback, um, to reward pass quarterbacks and wide receivers with the rule change over the last couple of years, we're seeing this kind of go into a run heavy league again. I think it's the first time since 2006 or 2007 where the expected yard per play for a run play is greater than a pass play. So that is a wild stat that we haven't seen in quite some time, and it's because of a lack of good quarterbacks. But we'll go into that as the show goes on.
I think it's a mixture of that and, there's obviously a ton of good running backs in the NFL as well. But the quarterbacks that we grew up with were, the pocket passers and, slinging the ball down the field. We're not on that really stage anymore. Like you'll get those guys that pass the ball deep down the field, surely. But a lot of it is playing conservative sometimes, trying to not force as many turnovers because, we grew up with guys like Favre and Peyton where they would just sling the ball and they would throw a ton of picks. And, now we're at a stage where people are trying to limit turnovers and try to get points out of drives sometimes. So that's really what comes down to it. But um, nonetheless, as I mentioned, a very hectic and wild week number 2 in the season. And there's still a long season to go, but there was a lot of big injury news that happened this past week, and it all started on Thursday night, and a pivotal AFC East matchup between the Bills and the Dolphins in Miami, where it was all Bills in this game. Johnson from the get go. I mean, we saw Josh Allen making some good throws in this one. James Cook having some big runs early in this game. The Bills' defense was playing phenomenal. Tua Tagovailoa really had no answer for this defense, throwing 3 interceptions in this game. But unfortunately, for what the big takeaway from this game, obviously, the Bills dominating for a 31-10 win. But the biggest news going out of this game was obviously the big injury to Tua Tagovailoa in this one. A sequence in where it was 4th down. He's trying to extend the play for his team, get the first down inside the goal line, try to give the Dolphins some kind of hope before the 4th quarter. Gets injured as he lowers his head trying to get the first down. He had the first down to begin with, trying to get extra yardage, and it led to him getting another concussion, pretty much. And it was a very scary sight, pretty much what we saw a couple years ago, what happened to him against the Bengals, not as badly as that one. Thankfully, he was able to walk off the field after the injury happened, but unfortunately for him, I mean, it's just another, tough injury, especially to the head area where, a lot of people after the game are, clamoring, should Tua play anymore? Should he retire? Because how many more hits to the head can you take at this point? Because you've been in the fencing position now twice after your head's hit the head has hit the field after a hard hit, and they just announced today that he's going to be placed in the IR, so he's officially going to be out at least 4 games, Probably will be longer if I have to expect because you don't want to rush him back from an injury like this because we saw what happened 2 years ago when they rushed him when he originally got the concussion, which was also coincidentally against the Bills. And he played the next week on a Thursday night against the Bengals, and that's where the initial head trauma, the big injury happened with his concussion. And then you had this sequence here against the Bills on Thursday. He gets injured. Dolphins are pretty much already out of the game as it was. And, it sucked because beforehand, Tua wasn't playing great either because the Bills defense, as I mentioned, played a phenomenal game. I mean, Devon Achane did his best to try to get the Dolphins in this one, but, Waddle was held in check. Tyreek Hill was held in check. And I gave the Bills defense no credit realistically last week, and I'm willing to admit, I was wrong about them. They played phenomenal in this game. Josh Allen didn't have to do too much offensively to get the win for the Bills in this one, as James Cook pretty much was the guy that was relying for the offensive side for Buffalo in this game. But Johnson, now it comes down to, I mean, what does the Dolphins season outlook look like now with Tua being on the IR? And realistically, we know he's already said he's not going to retire, but how many more hits to the head can you possibly take before you have to seriously consider not only your health but your family's health at this point? Because you're not only playing for yourself, but you're playing for them as well.
If I was Tua, unless you're going to win multiple Super Bowls, if you think you're going to win 4 to 5 Super Bowls, if you think you're going to make the Pro Bowl 10 times, you think you'll be all pro 6 or 7 times, if you think you have the potential to be an all time great, I think you should keep playing. And I think every NFL player really thinks that to themselves. But at the end of the day, like you've said, he's had multiple concussions. He is 26 years old. He has his entire life really ahead of
He
him.
just got paid this past offseason, too.
Really, if you go by just the average lifespan in the US by today's standards, not saying, listen, medicine keeps on getting better. We keep on, taking care of ourselves better. You've seen the life expectancy raised by 30, 40 years over the last 80 years. You can make an argument that he has another 60, maybe 70 years ahead of him in life. And if you're going to spend a large portion of that with CTE or brain damage, and it's just not worth it. I'm not saying that he should retire. He's going to be dumb if he doesn't retire because at the end of the day, this is his choice. But if I was him and I've made tens of millions of dollars, right? He's currently on $212 million, right? That's his contract, right?
Yeah.
But he's already made tens of millions of dollars. And he plays in Florida, so the tax hit isn't as great. I think his career earnings is somewhere north of 70 mil. So let's say after agent fees, taxes, jock tax, all that kind of fun stuff. Let's say he's made $33 million. At the age of 26, that's it. You're done. You could put that money away. You can put it in accounts. You can buy real estate. You can live off the interest for the rest of his life if he wants to. So if he thinks he's going to be an all-time great quarterback, then sure, he wants to keep playing. That's his business. Let him sail. But if I was him, I would hang up the cleats. That's what I would do.
Yeah, and I hate to ask about this argument because we knew what Tua was out of college. We knew the arm talent was there. We knew he was a special quarterback. And yes, before this injury happened, he was not having his best game. This was probably one of his worst games he's had in his NFL career. But then to have it happen, I mean, that's where it gets scary because this is why the NFL, is allowing some of these players to wear the
The
safety
guardian cap.
guardian cap. Yeah, because they don't want these injuries to happen more than ever. And this is a sole reason for it happening. And
Now,
yeah,
you know who really had potential to make the Hall of Fame and he gave it up because of the injury history, and it wasn't really the head trauma, it was just everything else. It was Andrew Luck.
hmm,
Andrew Luck seriously left football in his prime. He left it 6 years ago. I think he was 28, 29 years old, and he gave it up.
right,
He gave it up during a preseason game. He had suffered way too many injuries. He was slated to come back. And he said, "You know what? This just isn't worth it." Because he realized it too. He's a Stanford guy. He's a smart guy. He decided it's time to hang up his cleats. He has, I think he has children, doesn't he? He does have children.
yeah, he has two kids.
He has 2 kids, and He's got a wife and 2 kids, and he realized, you know what, this isn't for me. He hung up, and that was it. I don't know when he had the kids, so I think he had him afterwards, but that still
Yeah.
goes into that process because obviously I think Tua is going to want a family one day. He's going to want children, so that has to be kind of dawning on him too.
Oh, were you asking about Andrew Luck's kids, or you're asking about Tua's kids?
Oh, Andrew Luck. I think he didn't have kids when he
Oh,
retired, but does
Tua
Tua have
has
kids?
two. I thought you were asking about Tua. Tua has 2 kids.
Yeah, so he's got to think about them.
I'm not sure if Andrew Luck. I mean, this
At the
is.
time, he did not have kids. At the time,
But
he did not
I,
have kids, but
I'm
that was
glad,
definitely part of his thought process.
regardless of any of that. Anyway, it's a great point you bring up because Andrew Luck was still in the prime of his career when he retired, and that was
Yeah,
really
and he was
unexpected.
multiple time All Pro. This was a guy
Right,
that was established too. He had the wherewithal to make the Hall of Fame. Everyone knew that, and he gave it up because you know what? His
the
health
head.
was more important to him.
Yeah, another good example, Luke Kuechly. Same thing happened with him. Luke Kuechly was, you could argue, the best middle linebacker in the entire game, and he gave it up because he just couldn't. He didn't want to deal. He didn't want to have to risk with the concussions. That was the same situation with him.
It
Um,
happens to everyone in multiple sports, and I don't think he shouldn't have shame over this. I don't think anyone will shame him if he retires. Maybe have some rogue Dolphin fans that get mad over this, but the average
I
person, I would
I
say
don't even think
95% of people wouldn't blame him
I
at this
don't even
point.
think they
Even
would
the
be
most
mad at this
hardcore Dolphin
point.
fans would want to see him be like that
Yeah,
because
I
those
don't think
Dolphin
they'd be
fans,
mad.
10, 15 years from now, if he's having serious CTE problems, if he's having brain damage,
Yeah, like you don't
symptoms
want
of
to
brain
see this
damage, you
guy.
don't want to see that happen.
You don't want to see it happen again. Like he has taken 2 really bad hits from his helmet hitting the ground because of contact that's made on the field. That's why, and you were there when I said it too, when he was running originally. I said slide, slide, slide.
And the
Because,
second, it's bad because we saw it happen. We just knew immediately.
yeah, because you saw as soon as he lowered his helmet, you said to yourself, oh no, why are you doing that? And then as soon as it happened, you said, oh no, he's hurt again. And you saw him go into the defensive position. And thankfully, as I mentioned, it wasn't as bad as the first time it happened. And I mentioned he was able to walk up the field, but you knew something was wrong. You knew it was a head injury. Even with him limping, you knew something wasn't right. So thankfully, he was able to walk off, but it's a scary sight because as at the end of the day, it's the scariest thing. And when you're watching football, like you love the sport, but concussions happen. You know what the recent history with the NFL is with concussions and everything and brain damage and CTE, and it's just a bad thing that happens for the game that everyone loves and watches every single Thursday, sometimes Fridays, sometimes Saturdays, and obviously on Sundays and Mondays. It's just the biggest con from a game that has a lot of pros to it. So like I said, it's a sucky thing because this should have been a game that the Bills should have celebrated to win for how dominant they played. At the end of the day, it got marred with this big injury with Tua, and now wondering what his future now upholds for the next couple of years. And who knows if he even plays for the rest of this season? Because if the Dolphins are in a point where now you put him on the IR now, if you're not in a good spot the rest of the season, the next couple of weeks with Skylar Thompson or even Tyler Huntley, if they start him at some point after they signed him from the Browns, or I think it was the Browns or the Ravens practice squad, wherever he was. But if they're not looking good, then what's the point of even bringing Tua back at that rate? Like you might as well just let him rust out the rest of the season, and then hopefully for next year you could get him back to starting if he's in that mental capability to start next year for you. So if you're a Dolphins fan, it's just not a good situation for you right now. And unfortunately for the NFL, it's just not a good situation for you either because it's a glaring issue the NFL has had for years and years and years, and it's going to be the same issue for years and years to come on, where concussions are a big part of the game, and you're trying to implement new styles, as you mentioned the Guardian Cap, but is that going to be enough to prevent this stuff from happening? That's the whole that's the whole state of the NFL that is right now after this glaring injury. And as I mentioned, there were a lot more injuries. Thankfully, there weren't concussion issues, but there were a lot more injuries that happened this past weekend too, which we'll get into a little bit later on the show. Now, from a little bit of a somber note in that game, at least for me, Johnson, I could get into a little bit of a happier mood with this next game. How about the Saints this season? I mean, no one gave them a shot going into Dallas this past weekend. They were a near touchdown underdog going into Arlington. And not only did they win this game, but they won it in dominating and convincing fashion over the Cowboys. Alvin Kamara, what can you say more? 4 touchdowns in this game, 3 rushing, 1 receiving. Rashid Shaheed, another big game from him. Derek Carr looking amazing in this one. And the defense from the Saints played phenomenal as well. They forced 2 interceptions on Dak. CeeDee Lamb, other than one big touchdown reception, was pretty much held in check. And the Saints now go to a 2-0 mark on the season, beating the Cowboys by the final of 44-19.
Yeah, trouble in paradise for the Cowboys. They just signed Dak. Could be staring down 1-2 after this
Yeah, very tough
upcoming
game for them
trip.
this coming week.
Yeah, this is gonna be something else. So Jerry World has to be on notice. And are the Saints back? Let's find out.
The Saints, they have a big game coming this week too, and those are 2 games that we're going to be previewing. The mushing hour are coming in our next segment, but the Saints may be Clint Kubiak, the new OC for them, the son of Gary Kubiak, the former head coach of the Broncos and Texans, do a phenomenal job so far in his first season as the OC with this team. I don't think they have punted the ball yet so far this year, Johnson.
Greatest show
I
on
could think
turf
of
2.0. You're
I
correct.
I think Derek Carr threw an interception. I think that was the only stop that the Cowboys got in this game, and it's the only stop that the Saints have had this season. They have scored on every single possession they've had so far in their first 2 games of the season. So it's been a great start for New Orleans. And as you mentioned, Cowboys now could be trouble in paradise, especially if they lose this upcoming weekend, which we'll preview later on in the show. How about another upset that happened this past weekend? And this is another team that was also a touchdown underdog on the road, but in a rematch of last year's divisional round in the playoffs, Tampa Bay goes into Detroit and knocks off the Lions by the final of 20-16, despite a monster game from Aiden Hutchinson where he had 4.5 sacks in this one. A big game from Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery did good work in the backfield. But, a great defensive game from the Buccaneers in the passing game, forcing 2 interceptions on Jared Goff. Chris Godwin had a monster day in the receiving game. And Baker Mayfield and company were able to salvage away this road win to go to now a 2-0 mark on the young season.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe that the Bucks are playing this well. It's a little crazy. This is Brady back? Feels like it right now.
Baker? Why did I
Yeah, I
say
meant
Brady?
Brady. I
Oh,
meant Brady, bro.
okay.
Is Brady
Okay.
back on the Bucks? That
I
first
see.
season
It
of
took me a
magic.
second to, yeah, it took me a second to realize what you were saying.
I mean, he's doing his best
Um,
Tom Brady impression.
I mean, we knew the Bucks were going to make this a game. I don't think anyone expected them to win the game. And I think it's a good testament to what they're building. I mean, listen, I'm not the biggest Todd Bowles advocate as a head coach. I still think the jury's kind of out on him as a head coach, but I have to give him his credit. He's doing a great job so far on the season. In Tampa Bay, a team that pretty much no one was giving a lot of credit to maybe winning the division this year after they won it last year, has looked good through their first 2 games of the season. And they're one of the lone, I think, what is it, 9 teams in the NFL that are 2-0 going into week number 3. I think there's 5 in the AFC and 4 in the NFC. So good start for Tampa Bay. They have nothing to be ashamed of, especially with this shocking win on the road. And it's a Lions team that many people maybe, expect to be in the Super Bowl this upcoming season. So hats off to Todd Bowles and Tampa Bay for that win. Another upset that happened, how about Gardner Minshew and the Raiders going into Baltimore in a game in which they pretty much, it looked like they were about to lose, Johnson. They were down 10 points in the fourth quarter. It looked like Baltimore had this game locked up and sealed and would have gone to a 1-1 record. But Gardner Minshew and company get 2 touchdowns not 2 touchdowns. They get a touchdown that would set them up into a tie game and 2 field goals from Daniel Carlson, especially the game winner with 27 seconds left. And the Raiders stun the Ravens 26-23. They go to 1-1, and now Johnson, Baltimore starts the year of 0-2 for the first time in what seems to be a long time for this team. And coincidentally enough, the Harbaugh that we expected to go 0-2 is 2-0, and the Harbaugh that you might have thought maybe would be 1-1, 2-0 is now 0-2 to start this young year. So I keep mentioning it. It's been a wild start to this season.
Yeah, I didn't really have. Listen, I had faith in the Chargers. I think they'd do better than expected, so I'm not going to throw that Harbaugh on the bus. But to start 0-2 if you have a Ravens, you're staring down the barrel for 0-3. I've said that probably 7 or 8 times that phrase today, but that is the reality right now because
Yeah.
they were expected to at least be 500 at this point, maybe 2-0. If they should be 2-0 if it wasn't for that if it
A
wasn't Isaiah Likely's
couple
toe
the
being
game of
right
inches. Yeah.
there. Yeah, it's a game of inches. If his foot was a size smaller, they'd be potentially 1-0. If the fives would be different than 2-0, who knows? But we can't really play a game of what ifs in the NFL because if you'd be here all day. But what I can
Right.
say is Jerry Jones is going to be either very upset or you might see Harbaugh on the hot seat this upcoming week. We'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a possibility Baltimore could start 0-3s. If we know, as we'll preview a little bit later on, Baltimore goes into Dallas this upcoming weekend, and that's a pivotal game for those two teams. Either both teams are going to be 1-2 at the end of the week, or Baltimore's going to be 0-3, and the Cowboys at least will salvage something and go to 2-1. But you get the sense that it's a must-win for the Ravens because to go 0-3 in the AFC, that's a pretty much uphill battle to climb for and try to make the postseason in that daunted conference. So they need to get the win upcoming against Dallas this upcoming weekend. Um, I keep mentioning the word, but another upset that we had. How about the Vikings? They were pretty much almost a touchdown underdog, and at home, take on the Niners in this game, who didn't have CMC. McCaffrey before this game was placed on the IR, so he is also going to be out for an extended period of time for San Francisco. And the worst news for them, Johnson, is during this game, they lose Debo Samuel and Nick Bosa to both injuries. Samuel is going to miss some time. They're still waiting to diagnose how long Nick Bosa could potentially be out, if he will be out. Um, and on the other side of things, the Vikings get another strong game from Sam Darnold. Justin Jefferson had that 97-yard receiving touchdown, and he also did get hurt in this game. They're hoping that he won't be able to miss some time. But the Vikings, another stunning team that is off to a 2-0 mark as they once again beat the Niners in this one by the final score of 23-17.
Are you ready to say it that was Brian Flores framed in Miami? Are you ready to say it yet? Because his defense was absolute hell against the Niners. I think he had 6 sacks versus Sam Darnold, versus
Brock
Brock
Purdy.
Purdy.
Yeah.
It was the defense that made the difference this game. Granted, Sam Darnold did a fantastic job quarterbacking the Minnesota Vikings. One of the most could he be comeback player of the year? Maybe. He's
If the
got potential
Vikings
right
keep
now.
playing like, I mean, the Vikings keep playing like this, there's a good shot that is,
We may be
that could
looking at the
happen.
next Geno Smith like career right now.
Maybe.
It's definitely possible. Again, this is week 2, so we can't overreact and
Maybe it could
take it
be,
on a week by week basis.
it could be what's going on in Tampa Bay as well. Because look what happened with Baker last year. The same thing happened with him,
Baker's
and then he
kind of unique because he only had the 1 year stopgap. We knew Baker was good, and then he had one bad season, and
right,
then
but then he
he
got
kind of
paid
went
in
into
the
exile.
offseason after winning a division title. So
Yeah,
if
and
Darnold,
listen,
if he can somehow get this team to the playoffs, and again, remember they have JJ McCarthy in the waiting as well. But even if it's not with the Vikings, Darnold could earn himself a nice contract in the offseason because he's only on a
if I,
1 year deal.
and I don't listen, I don't know if we're gonna talk about the Giants, but if I was the Giants,
Uh,
and I would seriously, if Sam Darnold's starting by
I, I'm
week
not. I'm not.
11,
No, I'm not saying you're
I
wrong.
would actually start inquiring about JJ McCarthy. I'm not kidding.
They
I
won't
would
trade.
I would
They
call them.
won't trade. No, I don't think they're good. They won't trade JJ
It's not like
McCarthy.
Sam Darnold's old. He's 26, 20. Was he
No, I
27,
think
28
they
years
would have a
old?
better shot at getting Darnold before McCarthy,
I don't
like in
know
the
about that. We'll
offseason.
find out. We'll find out.
Um, yeah, I can't really talk too much about the Giants. To lose a game without giving up a touchdown, you scored 3 touchdowns. It's just absolute disaster. They're just a walking disaster each and every week, and I don't really. I just can't put much more uh, emphasis into how their games have been so far. It's only been week 2, so at least for my sake, the Cowboys lost, and then what happened on Monday night happened this week. So at least that saved my week this past week, and we'll get into what happened on Monday night in just a little bit. But another upset we had was how about Malik Willis? I can't believe I'm saying that sentence, but Malik Willis able to lead the Packers to the win over the Colts in their first game without Jordan Love. And he did what they needed to do in this game, Johnson. Willis threw only 2 incompletions, did not turn the ball over. They pretty much went run heavy in this game. 260 yards as a team rushing. Insane stat to say the least. And the Colts, you gotta wonder, is trouble on the horizon for them? They're off to an 0-2 start, and they play the Bears this upcoming Sunday. So not going to be an easy matchup for them. But I think a big concern is, obviously Anthony Richardson kind of struggled in this game with the 3 interceptions that he threw. But the involvement of Jonathan Taylor, I think, has also been a concern because they only used him for 29 snaps in this game. And he was killing it in this game. He had 12 carries for 103 yards, but a slow offensive game for the Colts once again cost them. As I mentioned, now they're off to an 0-2 start, and hats off to Green Bay. Without Jordan Love, they're still able to get the victory.
Yeah, it's going to be looking really strange for the Packers right now because the Colts handed them this game. They had multiple interceptions. They had multiple opportunities to get the stop on defense. They're starting Malik Willis for God's sake. Not like I'm saying that he's bad, but he hasn't yet to prove himself.
He threw his first
And
touchdown of his NFL career this week.
yeah, I mean it took a couple of years, but here he is. And if you're Indy, Anthony Richardson's gonna have growing pains. He's shown signs of greatness, so gotta give him some more time.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, he only played 4 games last year, and this is now his 6th game of his NFL career. So he's still
He's
basically
shown some
playing his rookie
promise.
year.
So
He just has to limit the turnovers. That's pretty much what it is. But the Colts also need to get Jonathan Taylor involved a lot more because you can't be wasting a 100-yard rushing game on just 12 carries and not use him the rest of the way.
minimum, he should be getting minimum 20 touches a game.
Right. I mean, even if you're down double digits, you have to at least get him involved. Look what the Packers are doing. Josh Jacobs had I think he had 80 rushing yards at the end of
81
the first
yards in
quarter.
the first quarter. Yes.
Right. I mean, they were running the ball down the Colts' throat. The Colts should have been doing the same thing, and they just weren't doing that. And it cost them this game, honestly. So they're 0-2, and Green Bay able to salvage a win and go to 1-1 in the year. And then before we go into the primetime games, we had a quite interesting game in Kansas City this past weekend between the Bengals and the Chiefs. A game in which, we saw the Bengals. I will say they played a lot better than they did in week 1. That's not really saying much. But they kept going back and forth. They seem to do this pretty much every time with the Kansas City Chiefs, especially from what we saw in the postseason. But the big story of this game, Johnson, a couple of things. We saw Evan McPherson miss a PAT, obviously, with the way this game ended. That was the difference in this game. But there was also a very controversial penalty called on the Bengals after a 4th and 16 pass in which Patrick Mahomes scrambled, tried to find a receiver, threw the ball. Early contact from the defender led to pass interference. Chiefs are able to go down the field, kick the game-winning field goal as time expired, and win this one by the final 26-25. They go to 2-0, and now for the Bengals, they drop to 0-2 on the young season.
Stat of the day: Patrick Mahomes leads the NFL in called back interceptions since 2018, since his first year starting the NFL. So that would have been his 17th interception that was ruled it's coming back. Uh, I just can't say anything more. I haven't been impressed by Patrick Mahomes in the last 18 starts for him. Fantasy wise, he has scored more than 21 points in two of his last 18 starts. So he hasn't been impressive. I mean, I keep on talking about peak Mahomes, and I get clowned on this all the time. You saw peak Patrick Mahomes probably 4 years ago. And I'm not still saying he's not good, but I'm just saying you saw the peak of him. And I got clowned on for last year. And now maybe doubt is starting to creep in because people are starting to look at him. This is a guy that threw 3 interceptions for 2 games this year. Never would have happened 4 or 5 years ago.
Well,
And
yeah, go
you
on.
know what he had 2 years ago? He had Tyreek Hill and he had prime Travis Kelce 5 years ago. I don't want to say he made his career off the backs of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, but all I'm gonna say is you could put Brock Purdy in there. He would have been fine with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce too.
Well, I will say this, and I'm definitely not willing to go to that extreme, but he'll definitely need to go back to what he used to be if that is the case, because they did lose Isaiah Pacheco in this game. He's going to be out for the next 6 to 8 weeks, so they're right now down a running back in that backfield. They have Samaje Perine, they have their rookie Carson Steele. They just signed Kareem Hunt today back. He's going to be on the practice squad, most likely will be on the team. in the next couple of weeks. So they're without a running game right now for the next couple of weeks. So they're going to need to throw the football a lot more than often, and they're going to need Patrick Mahomes to sling the football, and hopefully that he doesn't, force those turnovers that he's had so far to start this young season. But thankfully for them, they were able to salvage this win in a game in which was kind of sloppy for them for the most part, but they were still able to hold on to this 1 point victory and now go to a 2-0 record with a pivotal primetime game for them this upcoming Sunday night.
And I won't say anything more about Patrick Mahomes because I feel like I've given my piece multiple times. So we can just go into the next game.
All right, and as I mentioned, we had that game will be on Sunday night. We just had a most recent Sunday night game happen between the Bears and the Texans. Not much really to look into this game besides a couple of things. It was a very sloppy game for both teams. I think there was 21 accepted penalties in this game, so a lot of penalty yardage, especially on the Texans side. I think they had 12 penalties accepted against them for 150 yards, something like that. So a really bad stat for them. CJ Stroud was all right in this one, 260 and a touchdown. We saw a nice night out of Nico Collins. He was a monster for them. The biggest concern for the Bears, I guess, is Caleb Williams had another rough outing back there. Got sacked 7 times. He threw 2 interceptions. They haven't really been able to run the football so far the first 2 weeks of the season, so their offense still is struggling, even with the new quarterback and obviously these new wide receivers. They didn't have Keenan Allen in this game, but definitely a concern for the Bears going into week number 3 with the amount of points that they scored offensively. This week they didn't have, this week they were able to score most of their points offensively after last week. All their points were scored on special teams and defense. But definitely an eyesore the way the offensive line has been playing, as well as, the decisions that Caleb Williams has done so far throughout these first 2 weeks. But I guess, Johnson, the only good spot, the only good bright thing about it is it's only week 2, and there's still a very long season for Caleb Williams and company to fix these mistakes and try to make a postseason berth for Chicago for the first time in what seems to be a long time.
Yep, and if you're on BYST, he's got about 16 more games to figure it out. For those who don't know, that means Bryce Young Standard Time. Because apparently
Come on,
18
man.
games is now the amount of time you give to a young quarterback to get it together, especially when you give him no offensive line, no defense, no pass catchers, no running back. You're selling tickets for $1.80 to get into the stadium. You're playing in front of 100 people, and
100 might be
your owners don't
generous.
really care. So, 18 games is what you have now. So hopefully he has a
Yeah,
little bit more time than that.
I know we'll go into Bryce Young in just a little bit because I agree that the whole situation in Carolina is just downright disgusting, in my opinion.
And this is my
But
opinion.
yeah,
I think you should ban certain franchises from taking quarterbacks. I think if
quarterbacks.
no, I'm being dead serious. And listen, the Colts did it
So
twice
who
with
would be those
Andrew Luck and
teams?
Peyton. Listen, I think the Colts did it twice with both Andrew Luck and
And
Peyton Manning.
Peyton
They left Peyton on the side of a road, figure of speech, to die. And then
and they
if
got
it
Andrew
wasn't for
Luck
his
out of it.
Denver run, and he wouldn't be remembered like that. I think if I was Peyton Manning, I'd have more association with the Colts than
The
with the
Broncos.
Broncos and the Colts, and then
Mhm.
Andrew Luck's situation. So that's a team that has ownership. They have a history of mistreating their quarterbacks, and you saw Anthony Richardson get messed up last year too. So they have a long
Yeah,
history of not properly treating
that
their
one
quarterbacks.
wasn't. Yeah,
Listen,
I'm not
it's
going to
birds
blame
of a
the Colts for
feather.
that one.
It's birds of a feather. It's all part of the same underlying
No, I
problem.
know, but Anthony Richardson was more of like him not sliding and doing really dumb stuff when he was scrambling. Like he asked, like that was more on him than the Colts. If you want to
I mean, why was
play
he
like
running
that
in the
game,
first place, though? That it's all going to go back to
he's
the
a running
offensive line.
quarterback. I mean, yeah, sure, but the Colts offensive line's honestly not even that bad. They're one of the more respected offensive lines in the game.
Yeah, because if now that they've learned from their
Well,
mistakes.
now, yeah, I know. When they had Andrew
I
Luck,
mean,
and
listen, it took
yeah,
two
it was
quarterbacks. It
bad.
took 25 years and two quarterbacks for them to ruin it. But hey, they learned their mistakes, right? They learned from it.
For most of Peyton's
Took them
career, he
two
had a good.
decades.
For most of Peyton's career, he had a good O line. It was up until the end when the O line started getting bad. Like once Jeff Saturday left to go to Green Bay and he retired eventually, that's when the offensive line started to like deteriorate for Peyton, and then obviously the injury happened.
It's just certain franchises treat their quarterbacks better. Green Bay, if I was a quarterback, I would love to
Oh
go to
yeah,
Green Bay.
that's
I would love to go to
100%.
Green Bay. Even up until recently, New England was that place for quarterbacks. They completely botched the Mac Jones situation, but even their backups, Jacoby Brissett, Jimmy Garoppolo, they had great NFL careers for being backup quarterbacks.
Right, but they had
No
those
one would
careers
ever
on different
dream.
teams.
Yeah, and listen, they took him in, they took care of him, whatever. If I was certain quarterbacks, I wouldn't. If I was a quarterback, if there was certain franchises, I would just refuse not to go to. I think Carolina's up there now.
I would say
I think
Carolina,
Carolina's on
um,
that list. I would say Indianapolis is on that list.
Cleveland.
I Yeah, Cleveland's definitely on that list. They should have been banned probably 15 years ago from taking
Cleveland should have been
quarterbacks.
banned when they came back to the NFL.
Yeah, they should have been banned from taking quarterbacks 15, 20 years ago. And obviously, this is
Oh,
never going to happen. But there's just certain things that if I was a quarterback, I would say I'm not going to that team. I don't care if it's the number one pick. I'd rather take X amount of dollars less because I think they're going to ruin my career.
I'm
That's
willing to
just me,
put.
though.
I'm at the point where I'm willing to put the Giants on there because it's just getting worse and worse and worse.
No, the Giants have this is this. In reality, they have it. They have Phil Simms. They have Eli Manning.
That's
Granted, not great quarterback play,
the Super
but
Bowl winners, but that's about it.
yeah, they're Super Bowl winners. But you have to take a look. Listen, I'm not gonna put the Giants on that
It's
list
just
yet.
it's just
If you guys
more
take someone like
reasons.
Arch Manning and then you ruin Arch Manning, then you get put on that list.
Yeah, that's what I'm
I
saying.
think
Like
you at least have one mulligan per team because you're not gonna hit
you
hundred
know,
percent,
you
right?
know where it will be fun, like weird if like let's say like because obviously Daniel Jones is not the guy. Let's say if he goes to a different team, like once his tenure with the Giants is done and he starts playing great, then that's going to be like, oh, so it wasn't just him; it was just the organization itself. I don't know if that will happen. Yeah, I don't even know if he'll get another shot as a starting
It might
quarterback in the
happen with Mac
NFL.
Jones. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, look at Justin. Like, I know Justin Fields is playing as a backup still technically because Russell Wilson's hurt, but he's got the Steelers at 2-0, and he hasn't
Yeah,
really been playing terrible.
you gotta
Look
let
at
him pass the ball though.
look at Baker. I mean, his career. We thought his career was pretty much done as a starter
And it
after
was sad because we all
Tampa
believed in
Bay.
Baker too.
Right. I mean, listen, I won't be on the bandwagon because I wasn't a fan of Baker to begin with. I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. Where Baker has played great, and he's definitely done better than what I expected him to be out of the NFL, like out of college. And he definitely got a raw end of the deal when he was in Cleveland because they were saying how he wanted. We mentioned this last week too, where oh, we want more mature quarterback. We can't deal with Baker's injury, so we want a new guy. We want Deshaun Watson, which is not the most mature guy ever. This is probably the worst example of a mature quarterback in the NFL, especially when he does off the field.
Oh, by far.
And now he's getting his fair shot. We saw that 2-game stretch he had with the Rams before he went to now Tampa Bay, and he's thriving in Tampa Bay. He's rejuvenated his career, and you might be seeing it with Sam Darnold right now too, because he's got the Vikings at 2-0. If he continues to play the way this season, I don't know if the Vikings is going to be his team of the future, but he certainly is going to earn himself a contract in the offseason. And, you know, even Jimmy Garoppolo, you mentioned him. Look what he did for San Francisco. Yes, he sucked on the Raiders, but he got himself a big payday with Vegas that earned, like, because of how he did after going into a whole backup role with the Patriots. He even became the backup in San Francisco at one point for Trey Lance, and he earned himself a contract. So it's like, it's going to be a never ending cycle of like what these guys are going to be doing at the end of the day and trying to figure out what their careers are going to be. And maybe that, I guess we're pretty much into the Bryce Young conversation now, so we'll probably just we'll just finish our conversation with Bryce Young before we go into the Monday night game. Bryce Young at this point, I'm not willing to say is done yet. Maybe his tenure in Carolina is done. I
No,
mentioned
absolutely.
this.
He's gonna get another shot because he's a top 5 pick.
I
He'll get
mentioned
another shot.
I mentioned this to you, not obviously on the air, but like off the air, where is he's in a bad situation because this is technically his third head coach and new system he's under. Because remember, originally it was Frank Reich, then they fired Frank Reich mid-season, and they hired an interim. So that was technically his second head coach and system that he learned under. Now this is his third one, and David Canales, and this is the biggest eyesore for this one because the Panthers, if you look at their grade, if you're a fan of looking at PFF for stats and stuff, let's say you look at the Panthers offensive line. Technically, the Panthers offensive line, when their pass blocking, has been one of the best in the NFL so far through the first 2 weeks. So it's definitely bad that Bryce has got no touchdowns to 4 picks through 2 weeks of the season, and he's missing wide open throws. Last week we saw him miss a wide open touchdown at Adam Thielen, and they only got 3 points, and they've only scored, what is it, 13 points so far throughout the first 2 weeks of the season.
That is correct.
So it's like I just feel as if his confidence is just completely shot, and I hate it. Just sucks to say that. And they're considering him to be right now, unless he fixes his career the next couple of years or even this year, who knows? But they're saying he might be the biggest bust in NFL history. And it
Right
sucks
now,
to say that.
right, he has less wins, he has less touchdowns, he has a worse passer rating than Jamarcus
Because
Russell.
Right, and here's the biggest problem with that. Because you knew Jamarcus Russell really wasn't giving a crap when he was playing. This guy, Bryce Young, is trying his best. It just isn't working.
He's putting in the work. He's respectful. He's off the field. He's great. So he's not a PR nightmare.
Right.
Every single
He's
intangible
not
you would
doing
want in your
anything wrong
quarterback, you
off
would
the
want.
field.
It's not his fault.
Hey, listen, he got the raw end of the deal last year because that team was god awful. There was a reason why they were the number one pick in the draft, and there was a reason why they won 2 games last year, or 1 game, whatever it was. Offensive line was bad, receivers were bad, owner is bad, running backs are bad. All of it's bad. And they marginally fixed that in the offseason. They made some good moves in the offseason, at least for the offensive line, to help them. They added Deontay Johnson in the receiving core. I guess that's an addition. And then they drafted Jonathan Brooks in the draft, but he's still injured, so they don't really have. They pretty much have the same running game as they had last season. But he's just not in a good spot. As this team is just still bad on paper overall. And I think, obviously, as I mentioned, with hiring Canales, the guy that a lot of people consider to be the guy that helped Baker Mayfield rejuvenate his career, that's where everyone is really turned off by how Bryce has played right now, because he's not. Yeah, it just you're seeing the same things, and maybe even worse things than you saw last season with him. And now, because of it being a new coach, a new GM, a new whole system, once again, they're not tied realistically to Bryce Young at this point. They don't have to they don't have to start him. Hell, even the owner is not tied to Bryce Young at this point, because he's willingly admitted that he wanted CJ Stroud in that draft over Bryce Young. So Bryce is
Hindsight's always 2020, though.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously, anyone's going to say that after a season goes by, and you're the worst team in the NFL, and CJ Stroud's leading the Texans to a division title and a playoff win. But as you mentioned, it's 2020. You never know. I think you could make the case that even if CJ Stroud was the quarterback of the Panthers, I'm not saying it'd be this bad and he'd be benched by now, but it's not going to be any better. Your team's still terrible. It's not good on paper. And I'm not saying that if Bryce was in the Texans, then he'd be leading them to a division title, he'd be leading them to a playoff win and a 2-0 start to the season. It's just you're in a bad spot. Bryce probably needs to change the scenery. It sucks to say that because he's only in year 2, but he probably needs it at this rate. You mentioned Carolina's probably, they haven't had consistent quarterback play since Cam Newton's Super Bowl year in 2015. They haven't had a good quarterback season since then. And they're at the point where, they're one of those teams that if you're a quarterback, I'm not, let's say if I'm a quarterback going into this draft, you might pull an Eli Manning. You might say, you know what? I'm not going to play here. Either you trade me to a team that I'm willing to play for, or you got to pick somewhere else on number 1 because I'm not willing to play for your franchise right now. The Panthers are pretty much in that boat at this rate. And if they continue to play the way they are, they're going to be in the spot, Johnson, at the end of the season where they might be picking a quarterback in this upcoming NFL draft in April.
And only time will tell. And I guess we'll go into our final game, the Memphis game. The Eagles game. Yeah, still on college. The Eagles-Falcons game. I'm thinking, I don't even know why Memphis came in my mind.
I'm not sure either. It's all right. It's okay.
Yeah, because the Eagles dropped the ball, just like I dropped the ball right there during this intro.
I love that segue. Good segue, Johnson. I like that one. Let's face facts. This game was pretty much all Eagles, if you have to think about it. At least throughout the first 3 quarters of this one. Yes, it was close, obviously, going into the fourth quarter, but the Eagles were pretty much controlling this entire game. The Falcons do get a late touchdown from Darnell Mooney in the third quarter to give them the lead, but the Falcons were not capitalizing on a lot of their drives. A lot of drives ended in field goals. The Eagles obviously came into this game without A.J. Brown, so that's a big loss on their offense. He's going to be out for a couple of weeks, which is a big blow for them, especially my fantasy team, which I won't go into a little because I'm already upset about that. But the fourth quarter was the difference of this game, obviously. And we saw a tush push touchdown for Jalen Hurts. We saw the Eagles get another field goal. But the biggest part about that field goal, Johnson, is, as you mentioned, the Eagles dropping the ball. 3rd and 3, it was a bootleg pass to Saquon, wide open. And Johnson, as a Giants fan, I have seen this play happen so many times where Saquon's wide open, game on the line, game can end right there and then, and Saquon dropped the ball. And instead of the Eagles converting on 3rd down and icing the game out and running the clock out for the win, they have to settle for the field goal and take a 6-point lead. And that's where, surprisingly, Captain Kirk finally had his Monday Night Football moment. Drives down the field in 6 plays, 70 yards, scores a touchdown with 34 seconds left on a touchdown pass to Drake London, gives them the 1-point lead. Their defense then forces an interception 2 plays in on the next ensuing drive, and the Falcons steal away this game from Philly on the road with a 22-21 win, an early signature win for Raheem Morris and company in Atlanta before their huge Sunday night game upcoming with the Chiefs this weekend. But man, this one, as much as it pains Eagle fans to say, for me, I'm very happy how this game ended. But this is a game the Eagles are certainly not happy about, considering that they probably should have won this one.
I think it's time to change the narrative about Kirk Cousins in primetime because he's won 4 of his last 5 games on Monday night.
Yeah,
He started 0-9,
he
but he
did.
has clearly turned this around the last couple of seasons, being in Minnesota and now on Atlanta. The Washington Commanders, or I guess the Washington Redskins, when Kirk Cousins was there on primetime, of course they weren't going to be well. But when you have a team that is surrounding him, he has a decent offensive line, he has weapons, 4-5. So I think it's time to kind of change it. He's no longer the new nightmare, but I think he's had a quietly a very Hall of Good type career. And I've always said this: if Kirk Cousins maybe got a starting job 2 years sooner, if he wasn't injured all the time, I think he'd really be marching on his way to Canton. But he's not going to have the whole resume there. If he had started, let's say in 2013, he played that season. He played 2014. He didn't get injured last year in Minnesota. He played the full season. He very well could be looking at maybe 50,000 career passing yards right now, and he could be on his way to maybe 60,000 by the time he
Yeah,
would retire. But
you gotta remember he was drafted in the same draft class as RG3 when they took him number 2 in
yep.
Washington. And then RG3 went down with the injury. He overtakes him in the starting role. Then he goes to Minnesota, as you mentioned, and then obviously last year had the Achilles injury. And before that happened, the Vikings started off slow that year. They were 0-3, I think, to start the season last year. And then they've gotten a bit of a win streak. And then he got injured. I think it was week 11 of the season or week 10. And I think they were 6-4 after they beat the Packers. But that was the game in which he got hurt. So they very well could have been on their way to a playoff spot. And you mentioned he probably could have had another really solid campaign that would have gotten Minnesota into the postseason. And then he got injured. That ends his Vikings tenure. And now he's with Atlanta. And he's got to make the most of this contract because we mentioned last week, had that stinker of a game against the Steelers. And for the most part of this game against the Eagles, was not playing good again. And if not for that touchdown of Mooney in the third quarter and then that big drive to end the game to get the touchdown of Drake London, the Falcons pretty much lose this game on another bad offensive night. But they were able to get pretty much a prayer with that drop from Saquon, and then had a great protection for Kirk Cousins on each passing play that he had on that ensuing game-winning drive to lead them to this stunning win over the Eagles.
And just food for thought about Kirk Cousins. He's currently sitting with about 40,000 passing yards. He's about 133 yards short of that 40,000 mark. Say he did play all of last season. That's enough. Let's say those 9 games he missed. Say it's another 2,000 yards. That's not too unrealistic, right? About 250 a game,
No.
220 a game. That's realistic, right? So say he would have been around 42,500. Is that fair?
Yeah,
around 42,000.
that's
And
not.
then let's say he started his career 2 years sooner. Let's say he gets 6,000 yards in those 2 seasons. Very achievable, right?
Yeah.
That would place him 14th on the all-time passing yards leaders right now. So he has a very big what if to his career because Kirk Cousins is going to pass Joe Montana by the end of the season. He's going to pass Kerry Collins. He's going to pass Johnny Unitas. And he's going to be in the top 20 maybe by the end of the season. If not, definitely by the end of next season, nothing happens. So Hall, a very good career for, I think, Kirk Cousins, but he could have had so much more. I think he could have been even entered the top 10 potentially if his career started a year or two earlier, but it's always going to be a big
Well,
question mark.
I'll
So,
tell you this: if he's somehow able to bring the Falcons a championship at some point during this tenure, he certainly will enter that Hall of Fame conversation for sure. Because that's the one thing that's eluded this entire franchise right now. That's
and
Super Bowl
it's
ring.
crazy because Russell Wilson has 4,000 more passing yards than Kirk Cousins. They got drafted, I think, in the same draft class. And
Yeah,
He has missed major time. He has missed multiple seasons, like not multiple seasons because of injury, but
yeah. Like Russell's been
Russell
injured
Wilson has
himself too,
both.
but not as often.
No, Russell Wilson's kind of an Iron Man, to be honest with you.
I think he
He
had
plays
1 year
almost
where he
every
hurt his
single game.
hand, and that was it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking. He's played 188 games in 12 years. He plays almost every single game. He could be banged up a little bit, like you said, but he pretty much plays all the time. So Captain Kirk in another universe, if he gets to start earlier on, if he has that, you'd be looking at a guy that has 50,000 yards right now. But nevertheless, let's get into our mushing hour.
Oh yeah, let's get into our mushing hour, Johnson. Now, I kind of hinted at this during our college football mushing hour. This has got to be one of our worst starts we've had ever for the mushing hour. And the whole point of the mushing hour is, you probably don't want to make the picks that we are currently making for the week. But sometimes we make the right picks. This year, however, has not been that case. I'm 4-11. Johnson's 4-10. We have a combined 8 wins. It's not good, folks. But Johnson, the only way we can fix that is by having a absolute monster week this upcoming week number 3, and there are 9 games that we are looking at this upcoming week. So this is, I know I said this in the college football one as well, but this is the week, Johnson, hopefully, that we get things back on track. With 9 games on the slate, we have a great opportunity to do so. And I'll kick things off with our coverage of our week number 3 mushing hour with our Thursday night game taking place in the Meadowlands this week at MetLife Stadium as the New England Patriots at a 1-1 record go into MetLife to take on the Jets, who are also 1-1. Patriots coming off that overtime loss to Seattle. Jets coming off the win over the Titans. The Jets are a 6.5 point favorite in this game with the over under at 38.5. Johnson, who do you have in this one?
I need to see a victory. It's just gonna be Jets money line. I need to see something. I'm not
You
doing.
just
I
want the
know we.
Patriots to
I,
lose.
I, yes, I know. I need to see a win in the column. So I'm gonna take the minus like 250 right now. I just need to see a win.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, you just I understand what you get. Even if the Jets money line is like a minus like 400 or whatever, you
I
just
just
want
need
to
to see
see.
one go
You
through.
just need to. You just need something to go green. I got you. Um, I probably should go with that mentality too because I'm also in the same. Because you're literally only a half game better than I am. So I probably should do the same thing. Uh, I'm gonna. I really probably shouldn't do this, Johnson. I'm gonna go with the over. I don't know why. I think 38.5 is a little bit too low. I know it's a Thursday night game, and usually those don't go over. I think this one does. I think the Patriots might cover. I think the Jets win, but I think the Patriots can cover this one. But the Jets should most likely go to a 2-1 start. And you're just hoping for Travis Hunter at the end of the season. What do we have for our next game?
We have the Texans on the road going to the Vikings, even though the Texans are on the road. They are 2.5 point favorite over underslated at 45.5. Give me Texans minus 2.5. The fairy tale and story comes to an end for the Vikings at home this Sunday.
And how about this storyline, the Stephon Diggs revenge game? I believe this is the first time he's going back to Minnesota. Or maybe was he a Bill? Maybe when he was on the I think actually I think I'm wrong about that. I think he was on the Bills when in year two with Josh Allen, I think. So I might be wrong about making that statement. But so it's another revenge game, most likely for Diggs in this one. But he's going back to Minnesota, a very surprising matchup of 2-0 teams. But I agree with you in this one. I'm gonna just to play it safe. This was the one where I'll go with Texans money line instead of going to 2.5. Texans, in my opinion, are just a better team on paper, so I think they should get this one done. But it should be a very good matchup between these two teams. Now, the next game we have on our slate is a very shocking game as well for one of these two teams, at least record wise, as the Eagles go into New Orleans to take on the Saints. The Eagles are 1-1. The Saints are 2-0. But despite that fact, the Eagles are a 2.5 point favorite. The over under set at 49.5. What do you have in this one, Johnson?
I have the Eagles winning the game -2.5 here. I think the Saints are the losers this week. They dropped to 2-1. Eagles go to 2-1.
Call me crazy. I got Saints plus 2.5. I think the AJ Brown injury is more big than we expect because not having him in that lineup is going to hurt the Eagles. You kind of saw that on Monday night. Devonta Smith had a solid game, but if they're able to stop the running game of the Eagles, then you're forcing them to pass, and that's where I really get thrown off by this Eagles team. And with the way the Saints are playing right now, I think it's really tough not to at least back them in a game like this where they're a home underdog. So I have the Saints to cover in this one, and I think they could very flat out win and go to 3-0 in the season.
We
What do we
have the
have up next?
Chargers going into Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. Steelers at home are a 2 point favorite, and it's over under slated at 35.5. Give me Steelers -2. Jim Harbaugh runs into some difficulties. The Steelers march on to 3-0.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought this would be a matchup of two 2-0 teams this early in the season? I don't think anyone expected that. At least I didn't expect both these teams to be 2-0 to start the season. Uh, you know, I'm gonna go with Chargers +2. I think the Chargers win this game, honestly. I don't know what it is. Harbaugh's doing a good job so far early, and J.K. Dobbins has been running like crazy the first 2 weeks of the season. I think they continue it this week against the Steelers, so I got the Chargers to cover. Next game we have on our slate, we have a pivotal game that I mentioned earlier on for Baltimore. They are 0-2 in the season, and they go into Dallas to take on the Cowboys, who just came off that bad loss to the Saints. Baltimore is a 1 point favorite on the road in this one, with the over-under slated at 48.5. What do you have, Johnson?
Cowboys +1. They're going to lose a heartbreaker, and Mike McCarthy gets fired.
So you have the Cowboys lose by a point?
Yes.
Okay. You said if McCarthy gets fired?
Yep.
No, can you say that for the end of the season when they miss the playoffs?
Nope.
It
Mid-season because
has no,
Jerry's impatient.
it can't happen mid-season. That just can't. That's not. I don't want that to happen. But regardless, I have the Ravens money line in this one. I cannot imagine them starting this season 0-3. I think Lamar Jackson and company have a big game in this one in Dallas and drop the Cowboys to 1-2. At least that'll be funny for me. What's our next game this late?
We have the Detroit Lions going on the road into Arizona to take on the Cardinals. Lions on the road are a 3 point favorite, and the over under slated at 52.5. Give me Lions -30 here. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. will be locked up by this Lions secondary, and I think they win by a field goal. That's not a hard to imagine.
For me, Johnson, this is my game of the week. I love this game. You know how I've been talking about the Cardinals all season so far. Um, the Lions obviously coming off that tough loss to Tampa, and the Cardinals just steamrolled past LA this past week. But I agree with you. I think the Lions get this win. I'm going to go with the Lions -3 as well. I just they're just still a better team on paper. I just can't. I'd be very stunned if they lost this game. But this could be a shootout between these two teams. But I think the Lions get it done, and I think you see their offense that we expected for them to happen last week. They get back on track this weekend against a Cardinals defense. It's still kind of iffy on the young season. The first of our weekend primetime games, we have the Sunday Night Football game between the Chiefs going into Atlanta to take on the Falcons. Chiefs, despite being on the road, are a 3.5 point favorite. Over under set at 46.5. Who do you have for this one, Johnson?
Chiefs minus 3.5. The refs will give the game to Kansas City on a late touchdown attempt that Patrick Holmes will throw a pick. It'll be overturned. Then they'll hit the touchdown and they'll win the game. So
Oh,
that's my
okay.
prediction.
Uh, I have the Falcons to cover this game plus 3.5. I could see them losing by a field goal, like how the Chiefs just won. But I think you're going to see the Chiefs struggle without Pacheco in this game. I think the Falcons will take advantage of that, and I might be daring to say they might win this game. But I think the Chiefs still get it done just because they have Mahomes. I think Mahomes will have a big game this upcoming weekend. But this should be a fun game between those two teams down in Atlanta for that one. What's our next game, Johnson? We have two Monday Night Football games coming this week.
We have the Jacksonville Jaguars going into Orchard Park to take on the Bills. Bills are at home minus 5.5 point favorites, and 45.5 is the slated over under. This can be Bills minus 5.5. I said that Mac Jones is going to be starting by week 8, and the Jags will lose another game.
Yeah, Jacksonville's 0-2, and they looked pretty bad this past weekend against the Browns, so it's not looking good for them at all. And Buffalo coming off that big performance defensively against Tua before he got hurt, and then Allen and company are just playing great offensively to start the season. Jacksonville is going to struggle in this game. To play it safe, I'm just going to go with Bills money line in this one. I'd just be very stunned if the Bills lose this game. They're playing on all cylinders right now, despite all the losses they had in the offseason. I think this is I think Jacksonville's in for a very long season, and honestly, Johnson, they lose this game, I wouldn't be shocked if Doug Pearson's on the hot seat and maybe gets fired midseason for Jacksonville. So definitely something to tune in for or tune into to look out for the rest of the way. But as I mentioned, there are two Monday Night Football games this weekend. That was the first one. The second Monday Night Football game, which will conclude our mushing hour this week, the Washington Commanders coming off that, for me, disgusting win over the Giants. Coming to this game at 1-1, going into Cincinnati to take on the Bengals, who are off to an 0-2 start. The Bengals come into this game as a 7.5 point favorite. Over under slated at 48.5. Johnson, who do we have in this one?
Bengals will not start 0-3. Give me Bengals minus 7.5. They're going to win in convincing fashion. Jade Daniels looks good, but he gets a loss here.
Yeah, I the 7.5 is concerning. I think for me it comes down to, can this Washington defense stop the Bengals? And I think they're gonna get T. Higgins back this week. At least the Bengals are hopeful they can get him back, because obviously they haven't had him the first 2 weeks. But for me, I just can't see Washington winning this game. So I'm gonna go with the Bengals minus. I'm gonna do alternate spread. I'm gonna go minus 5.5 in this one. I'm just to ensure that if they win by 7, I don't get screwed by the half a point. So I'll go Bengals minus 5.5 to wrap up our mushing hour for week number 3. Any final thoughts, Johnson, before we wrap this one up, heading into week number 3 of the NFL season?
I hope the Patriots lose the next 15 games in a row. Excuse me.
I know how much you want Travis Hunter at the end of the season, so I'm sure you are looking forward to that.
Generational talent.
I'm just hoping Myles Garrett doesn't kill someone on Sunday against the Giants, because I'm sure that's going to happen, and I'm not going to have a good time. But as long as the Cowboys and Eagles lose, I could care less. Then I won't feel as sad inside. So as long as every other team in the NFC East is miserable, then I'm okay with it. If I'm miserable,
Misery
they have to be
loves
miserable
company.
too. Exactly. And I think that's a perfect way to end our show this past week, as week number 2 of the NFL season has concluded. We now head into week number 3 of the National Football League with a lot of pivotal games, a lot of primetime games Thursday night. You have Sunday night, 2 Monday Night Football games, as well as a lot of games between a bunch of 2-0 teams playing each other this week. So some teams will be 3-0. We also got to figure out if some of these other teams will be 0-3 at the end of week 3, so we'll have to see how it all unfolds. This has been Nicholas Bologna, joined alongside with Andrew Johnson for the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your weekend and enjoy your NFL Sunday.